The last story I want to hit has to do with this. This is coming out of RT. This meeting took place, I believe, yesterday. Syria counting on Russia's support to push for the, quote, domestic unity, unquote. Damascus is eager to restore proper ties with Moscow, jeopardized in the following years since the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad. Now, I know that you and I have different points of view on what happened in Syria regarding Russia's influence or Russia's, let's say, dropping the ball and not allowing Syria to fall. But what do you make of that? I mean, you effectively have a terrorist government that is aligned with the West, that is doing everything in their power to get support from Israel and America. America has removed the sanctions. They are obviously working at the behest of America, Turkey, Israel, etc. And here you have the Russians, I guess, trying to make some kind of deal with Syria, saying, hey, we depend upon your support for quote unquote stability. How does that fit into this narrative of what has been taking place so far?
Yeah, and I mean, this is members of this government killed Russian soldiers.
Yes.
So that's a question that Russians need to answer, and families of those soldiers need to find an answer to. I personally think that Russia has harmed itself with its actions in Syria, harmed its future. In fact, I would say there wouldn't have been any Russian international space on the international scene if it wasn't for Syria. Let me just be very frank, and whoever likes it, and whoever doesn't like it, I don't care, honestly. Yeah. Russia would have stayed a second-rate power if it didn't intervene in Syria. Syria is the one that uplifted Russia into an international scene. Okay, the intervention that's martyr General Soleimani, who personally traveled to Moscow to meet with President Putin, who wasn't convinced of even saving Syria. That, whatever General Soleimani said to President Putin, I bet you it had the same tones that I'm using right now. And let's not forget, Russia right now is rushing to build bases in Libya in case that it loses its bases in Syria, and it's building them in areas that Turkey occupies in Libya. So it's going to be basically under Turkish protection, its bases in Libya. And Libya would have been an open place for Russia if it didn't also fail General Muammar al-Gaddafi and the country when the NATO attack came at the country. So we're looking at series of Russian failures over the last decade and a half, and only being actually maintaining its now international influence because of the sacrifices of others, the sacrifice of Libya, the sacrifice of Syria, and the sacrifice of General Soleimani himself.
Do you accept, though, that how can I say this? I agree with you that the fall of Syria was detrimental to Russia, especially in that region of the globe, and to Iran, for that matter. Do you believe that Russia and Iran, left to their devices, would have had the capability of maintaining the Syrian state, even with everything that was taking place when the fall occurred?
Look, over the last 2 weeks, I interviewed a lot of former Syrian generals,
yes,
and Syrian personalities. I haven't aired any of the interviews yet. We're having to right now, modify the video and the audio so these people don't end up being killed. And I know exactly what happened in the last hours in Syria.
Can you,
And
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you tell us? I mean, like, is it, I'm sorry, please continue.
yes, look, I was hoping that to finish this content so people, because we talk a lot and people tell you, where do you know these things, how do you know these things, and they have their own stories. But hopefully in the next few days this will be out. But here's what we know. The Syrian military was fighting the good fight. Both the 8th Army in Latakia was advancing through Idlib and was at the doors of Idlib city itself. And Hezbollah's forces in Homs had defeated the hordes coming from Aleppo and Hama and pushed them back, and were at the gates of Hama city to recapture them. When the Russian Air Force bombarded the 8th Army at the doors of Idlib city and attacked its supply routes, its ammunition depots, and its gas depots. And similarly, the column of Hezbollah between Homs and Hama was attacked by the Russian Air Force. At least 60 Hezbollah armored vehicles were destroyed in this attack. And this is what really led to the defeat of the Syrian military. As soon as this happened, because multiple, of the communications, which are all Russian communications of the Syrian military, was jammed, and orders of retreat and surrender were coming. Multiple generals, both in the Damascus surrounding areas and the Homs, Hama, and Deir ez-Zor areas, all refused orders and went ahead and confronted the HTS. And the attacks that came from Russia, this is very also important for everybody to know, that it wasn't HTS that occupied Damascus. There is the 4th Army in the south that was stationed in Daraa, that was created by the Russians after the reconciliation efforts that were done with the rebels in Daraa, or the death squads that were in Daraa at the time. A separate army, the 4th Army is called, was created for them under Russian control and auspices, and they entered Damascus before HTS. HTS convoys coming from Homs towards Damascus were stopped by the Russians and told to wait, while the 4th Army coming from Daraa entered Damascus and confronted the remaining Republican Guard that were refusing to surrender, and the generals were assassinated. And eventually, the 4th Army entered all the security offices in Syria and set all the files on fire. All the archives were set on fire, all that on the first night in Damascus. And after all the records were cleared, all the the security offices were destroyed, the 4th Army withdrew, and that's when HTS and Jolani were allowed to enter Damascus. All of this was done under direct coordination and orders of the Russians. The Hezbollah and the Republican Guard and the Iranians were all left in the dark and were made to be targets as President Assad was kidnapped to Moscow.
But considering that this was, as you would admit, damaging to the Russians, and that I think even they would admit this was damaging to the Russians, the last thing they would want to do end up in Libya under Turkish thumb. Erdogan is a snake, and you can't trust Erdogan as far as you can throw him. Why would they do that? What would be their motivation for attacking a military position that, all things being equal, it was in their best interest to keep?
Well, there's two things here. Number one is the still continued Russian delusions that they can somehow be part of this
The West.
whiteness identity and or even lead it now, with the rebranding of Russia as the savior of the Christian family. And so there's that. There's, of course, the millions of Russian citizens of the Zionist colony that have a lot of control around inside Russia itself and its economy also. And of course, the rabbi of President Putin is the head of the Shabbat movement. And the Shabbat movement is the ultra fascist Zionist. I mean, even President Trump doesn't have a Shabbat rabbi. Okay. So this shows you the limitations that we are dealing with as people from the Arabic world.
But what would have been the point of Soleimani going to Russia and Russia agreeing with him in order to hold Syria if they're just going to turn around a few years later and give it up? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm probing because this is a point of view I haven't heard before, and I need to watch your videos when you put them out. But I am curious, why protect it in one sense and then give it up a few years later?
Because of Ukraine. You know, the West strong-armed Russia into this war in Ukraine, forced them into it, which has now, in a way, distracted all the Russian economy and military into its own backyard. You see, Syria elevated Russia back from the collapse of the Soviet Union into a world power that can decide, that has a say in the future of the world. Russia's exit from Syria and its quagmire in Ukraine clips its wings and brings it back to its true size, which is a regional power, unable to compete with the United States on a global scale in terms of setting the path of history. And anyone that wants to set the path of history has to do it from greater Syria region, from Damascus, from Beirut, from Jerusalem. You can't set it from another place on this planet.
Is it possible, to any degree that's possible? And again, I need to see your videos. I need to watch them because I am curious about seeing what the generals say, that this is them not wanting to accept that it unraveled and putting the blame on Russia. I mean, what sense did you get when you were talking to them? Is this, I don't want to deal with personal blame, so I'm going to put it and say the Russians did it? Or you got the sense that, no, they're telling me exactly what they experienced. It came across as honest and straightforward in their depiction of events, of what took place in the last few hours. Because that is a brutal depiction, if that's true. Because that would be, as you point out, a series of failures by the Russians that is cataclysmic. Losing Syria is detrimental, not just to Syria, it's detrimental to Iran, which by definition means it's detrimental to Russia and to China. That's a hell of a loss, especially to turn around and effectively attack forces that you were supposed to be defending.
Yeah, I remind everybody two things. One is in 2018, the last battle around Idlib and the liberation of Hama and Aleppo.
Yes.
The HTS and all these Wahhabi death squads were being routed and pushed towards Idlib city, their last holdout. And Idlib city is it's a town. It's not a city. It's just a few 100,000 people. It's not like even 1 million people.
So 40,000 were terrorists. I mean,
yeah.
by the UN estimate, it was like 40,000 were terrorists.
Yeah. So, and when you're on, so Hezbollah and the Syrian military were pushing the terrorists towards Idlib city. There was a huge battle on the intersection of the M4 and the M5 highways, the main two highways in Syria, just at the intersection between Aleppo, Hama, and Idlib. And the Turkish military had to intervene directly. Prior to that, in that battle, the Turkish military was just giving suppression fire through its howitzers to aid those terrorists. At that point, the whole defensive line of the terrorists collapsed, and the allied forces of Syria were pushing, and they were going to just enter the city. And that's when the Turkish military directly intervened, and they got a whooping. 40 Turkish soldiers were killed in a span of minutes, and tens of armored vehicles destroyed. And the Russian Air Force decided to stop all the air cover.
Pull back, right.
Okay. And at that point, the Turks flew over Idlib with their F-16s and started bombarding the advancing columns of the Allied Syrian forces. And so if Russia didn't stop Hezbollah and the Syrian military from advancing by continuing to give them air cover, the Idlib would have been liberated then, and we wouldn't be talking about what happened in December and the fall of Damascus. So Russia made a deal then, and it forced the Astana talks, and it started negotiating with Turkey, because as you remember, also Turkey at that time was threatening to close the Bosphorus canal strait, meaning blocking Russia's Black Sea fleet from entering the Mediterranean. And Russia buckled, and that withdrawal of Russian air cover led to the martyrdom of tens of Hezbollah and Syrian military commanders under those conditions, and the ceasefire was declared then. So Russia, from that point on, has made the choice that it's going to negotiate with Turkey using Syria as a pawn. And it's Iran's attempt to bring air defenses into Syria, and Syria's military was vetoed and threatened by the Russians to leave completely if Iran entered air defenses into Syria. Those are not jokes. Syria at this point was dependent on the presence of Russia's air force, and it couldn't take decisions without its approval, even when its allies were trying to help it.
Yeah. Wow. Laith, I am going to look forward to those interviews. That is a hell of a get in order to be able to get some of the Syrian commanders who were on the ground in the last minutes. I thank you for this. Honestly, man, I'm glad that you're back. I'm glad that you're safe. I'm glad that you're back on the horse.
Thank you, Jamal.
Be safe, man. You have a good one. Have a good one.